Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to use Scrolls of Hallow and Places of Power in order to tweak your long rest mechanic in your game and hopefully fix some of the problems with existing systems. So, why would we tweak the long rest mechanic? Well, the standard long resting mechanic allows for players to rest actually quite frequently, which allows them to have a really high expenditure of their resources during encounters, which can kind of trivialize them. The existing resting mechanic doesn't tend to take long enough for meaningful consequences to happen in terms of actions that monsters or villains could take. And games that don't have consequence tend to sort of skew on the boring side. Having bodies knit themselves together and restore all of someone's spell slots via sleeping hurts immersion, but I think I have a good solution for this. Stay tuned. So there are existing systems that attempt to deal with some of the flaws in the existing long rest mechanic, and they're fairly commonly used. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details on them, but I will just sort of gloss over them and kind of their pros and cons. One of these systems is gritty realism. The pro of the gritty realism long rest system is that it takes ages to get the full benefit from a long rest. So any consequences that would potentially happen, there's plenty of time for those things to develop. It also makes martial classes more viable because they are more or less fully effective as fights continue on and you have multiple encounters between from the time of your last long rest, because they don't need to wait a week. They just keep on plugging away. It's also excellent for immersion as it's much closer to what we know and understand in the real world in terms of healing. On the con side of things, it is probably, let's be honest, too restrictive. And a DM, in order to try to tune the content so that players won't need to rest, will often skew on the side of undertuning things, and then the game can be left feeling sort of without consequence. Obviously, a DM who can thread that needle to get the encounters just right, it can actually be quite a rewarding system to be under, but that's a lot of pressure on the DM. And to be fair, encounter balancing is part of the skill behind being a DM, and there is an art to it, but it would be helpful if systems aren't making that job harder than it needs to be. Another less common resting system is the adventuring day mechanic. If I'm being honest, I don't think that there's a lot of people that really use this system for a few different reasons. On the positive side, it essentially makes players have to make tactical choices about when to use resources and when to deploy them because they know that they're going to be having a lot of encounters in a day. On the other side of things, it causes a lot of problems for immersion in that it can feel very contrived to have a set number of encounters per day before you have the chance to rest. It can feel very arbitrary, like, oh, so we can rest in this room, but we couldn't rest in the last one? I mean, if you look at the way that room looked, I mean, I would choose that room over this room. You know, if possible, we'd like to avoid that kind of discourse, let's call it, between players and DMs. It can lead to over-conservation of resources on the player's part, a lot of casting of cantrips, etc. Plus, it's based around the CR/XP system that already exists in the game, and anyone who's been around the game for a while learns that CR, aka challenge rating, there's monsters that are much more effective or less effective that are the same CR as each other. It's not the best implemented system, and a DM who's balancing the adventuring day mechanic around that, which is how it's meant to be done, can find that their encounters are vastly under or over-tuned. Also, many, or I believe most tables don't want their game to be only combat, and having that number of encounters for a single day for your characters is going to make for a very combat-heavy campaign. And I think we all like to have the three pillars. Combat's just one of them. We also like to have exploration. Exploration is discovery. People are like, what does exploration mean? It's mostly discovery. It's finding new places, meeting new NPCs, uncovering a map, finding secret areas, and of course, socialization is the other pillar. And that, there's actually quite a number of campaigns that would be their most common thing. It really depends on whether you have a table full of people who skew towards being wargamers, or a table full of people who skew towards, if you have a D&D game made out of a bunch of people who are in a theater troupe, for instance, that game is probably going to be mostly RP. Critical Role is a great example of that. Anyway, I could go into a rant further than this about the Adventuring Day mechanic, but that would actually probably be best left to its own video, but I wouldn't recommend that mechanic to people for their games. The last existing system that people use quite commonly is long rest restriction, which is just the DM essentially says no when players ask if they can long rest. And I mean, of course, it's best if the DM comes up with a reason for that. No, because you're not in an inn is one that I've used before. But that can lead to problems in the middle of dungeons and things like that. What I'm suggesting for this video is actually a tweak off of long rest restriction, because of course, long rest restriction as it is can lead to player DM conflict. Like, why can't we rest here? We should be able to rest here, and we don't want that. What we want to do is we want to put a concrete mechanic in place so that you know as a player when resting is viable or not. And we do that via having either pre-existing places of power, or if the players are going to be the ones to do it, they use a Scroll of Hallow. Now, how this would work would be, if the players use a place of power, that resting site could be reused. Whereas a Scroll of Hallow, unless of course in the exception of once it's been hallowed, it continues to have worshippers there, then in that case it would be able to be reused. But if you're just dropping down a Scroll of Hallow in the middle of a dungeon or something like that, then that place would only be good for one rest. Basically the reason being, once the players have rested there, they move on from the site, and the Hallow degrades after that, because it's not actively being used as a place of worship. So why would we do this? One of the big reasons is immersion. So as we know with long rests in D&D, characters, unless they have like a ring of regeneration, they're not regenerating from just walking around. They're not getting hit points back just from examining a wall for 10 minutes or something like that. No, they only get hit points back when they sleep. So why is that? Why do they only get hit points back when they sleep? There's a lot of shrines around that already exist in the game. You go into a group of kobolds, they're going to have a shrine. Almost everything that's in the game has some sort of shrine. There will even be animals that sometimes congregate around some place where the magic of nature is stronger than in others. And so what if they're doing that because they get an actual practical benefit out of it? Well, suddenly all of those shrines make sense. There's a reason for them. Having a connection to your particular god allows for a channeling of divine energies to enter the character's body and repair all of the damages, etc. So why do the characters and creatures, why do they need to worship a particular deity, and why do they need to develop a shrine? Well, think of it this way. The shrine, it's almost like plugging something in. It's a concentrated place that a deity claims to get around all of that noise out there and have a direct connection between themselves and their worshippers. And as worshippers worship the deity, and the deity responds to that worship, as the deity gains power from that worship, and then the deity is also able to bestow power onto some chosen members of its followers as a result of that worship. Well, the place that worship primarily takes place can start to take on a sort of divine power of its own, a sort of repository of that power. Now, this power doesn't have to be divine. It could just be a place where it's a confluence of ley lines. It could be a place where nature's growth is particularly potent, like in the middle of a jungle where the power of the planet's energy is particularly effusive. all of those would explain different places of power that you could find and where you could find them. But I think, given the number of deities that are in 5e and just D&D in general, and there are a lot, there's so many, it would make sense if the most common one that you found would be a divine place of power. Now, these places of power could have benefits to those specific classes, to specific worshippers, as long as you have someone in the party that is linked to that deity in some way, shape, or form. Then they would then bestow that deity's magic or the power of those ley lines through to the rest of their party members. They would be sort of the conduit for that in order to allow everyone to gain the benefit of a long rest. Now that obviously poses the question, what about in the case of these evil deities? It's a good aligned party. In a lot of cases, the places of power that you're going to be finding in a dungeon or something like that are going to be of the opposite alignment of whatever your party is. Otherwise, why are they in there fighting them? So, in that case, that would be a place that a Scroll of Hallow came in. If you want to be fairly hardcore about it, then you can have resting require a place of power, and then it would need to use one of these Scrolls of Hallow in order to effectively consecrate this place to a different deity that the party is aligned with. And of course, the deity then would have this extra well of power that has effectively been stolen from the worshippers of this other deity. You can imagine sort of the kinds of quest hooks and consequences and things like that that can result from that. I wouldn't recommend direct action by deities. That's not really fair play, but more along the lines of its worshippers will be really riled up that they lost their place of worship, and that their god would be unhappy, and they'll try to seek revenge, etc. So this is sort of how this could work. Meanwhile, the deity that the players are aligned with, well, they just got stronger. And if there's one thing that's a consistent theme with deities, it's that they want to be the strongest. So you just gave them a well of power, so yeah, of course they're going to, in return for that, in order to encourage you to continue doing this, they're going to grant you those spell slots back. They're going to heal your wounds for you. In that sense, it very much helps with immersion. And as for Scrolls of Hallow themselves, people might be listening to this and going, oh, well, how is this going to work at low levels of play? What if we don't have a cleric? That's why I'm specifically saying Scrolls of Hallow. I would say where players would get them from is the local temple. They could buy them at a gold cost, or if they can't afford that gold cost, like say the DM doesn't want to change the cost of it throughout the campaign, they want it to be an amount that's going to be restrictive for them later, or some sort of gold sink for the players later. It would be a quest hook generator early on. So these clerics at the temple that are able to cast this, the players say, hey, we can't afford that. And the clerics say, oh, well, we have a job for you. Or maybe we have several jobs for you, depending on how many scrolls the players are going to get, whatever comes out to be a fair negotiation, and for how many scrolls you want to have available within their game. Bonus points if the local deity that the characters have to contract with in order to get these Scrolls of Hallow is of a type or alignment that the players wouldn't normally worship. Even better if they end up having to do something that is distasteful to them. I mean, it's best if it's not too bad. Nobody wants to actively do truly evil acts when they're playing a good aligned character. That can lead to a lot of questions, but it could be enough that, say, maybe it's an evil temple and they don't get the characters to really carry out their most evil of deeds, but maybe they get the characters to guard a shipment of something, and the players can just sort of, hold their nose and look the other way kind of thing. But the players probably know that they're being involved in something diabolical, but they sort of have to go along with it in order to get these scrolls. And then later, once they've been able to use scrolls, and obviously they'd be using them to consecrate to another deity, and probably the cost of said scrolls should be reflected in that. Once they have grown strong enough, then they can come back and exact some sort of appropriate, satisfying response on that temple. Perhaps even consecrating the temple itself that had put them up to this, to a different god. Now, mechanically, if you do have clerics in a party or a cleric in a party, and they want to create scrolls of Hallow when you do get to higher levels, I wouldn't have the making of the scroll be the 24-hour cast time that's part of Hallow. I would have making the scroll just take an action, just 6 seconds. You're just putting that 5th level spell magnitude onto a scroll. Hallow, as I understand it, or what would make sense to me, is that 24 hours is used for the process of hallowing the room or the area or whatever it is to that particular deity. It has to sort of infuse it and sort of establish the connection. Once that has happened, then they have that. Basically, it's like creating a big channel to that particular deity, or down to that particular deity, that just cuts through everything, cuts through all the BS and all the noise and everything like that. Boom, they get the benefit of their long rest. And if they have some worshippers, I mean, perhaps the players could end up with some of the worshippers of this deity as groupies, or essentially like temple knights kind of thing, where they sort of follow them around, and the characters go and clear an area, and then they end up essentially consecrating it, and then those knights stay there to guard the temple, and then you have other worshippers come in. They may end up doing that, and it may end up being that where they are isn't a place that anyone would want to come for worship, and then in which case the hallowed area simply degrades. It's not usable anymore. And so just basically the players just used it to get that quick burst of divine energy. They get all their resources back, and then they move on, and the place degrades. Now, if this became very common, the deity may come to view it as a sort of parasitic relationship between themselves and the characters, in that the characters are taking too much from the deity, and because they aren't turning into places of worship that the deity can gain real power from, it starts to sort of, there may end up being some consequences. What those are would depend, but it may be as simple as, even if the deity doesn't speak to the characters directly, it may be something like suddenly someone's highest level spell slot doesn't work or something, or they have a key spell fizzle or something, and then when they go to investigate it, I mean, again, this could be a quest hook, go and speak to a cleric, and the cleric is like, oh, well, I know what's happening here. Lathander has decided that that's a very good aligned god, so it'll probably be something like, Lathander has decided that the resources that are being spent on you would be better put towards some of our other followers and advance our cause better. Whereas a less kind of good aligned, or perhaps a more straightforward god, or even just like a chaotic good, maybe just very direct, like, hey, you need to be making some of these places that you're using, in which you're using my power, into places of worship, so I can get some of that power back via the worship. I wouldn't necessarily think of it as a parasitic relationship on the deity's part either, because if you think of it like each person has sort of this latent amount of spiritual energy, and it's going to go somewhere. If it doesn't go to a deity, if it just sort of like leaks out into the world, then that's like your primal places of power explained. That's your sort of places where nature is particularly strong. Maybe a group of people that worshipped or that didn't worship a deity, they just worshiped nature. It's like, boom, there we go, right there. Oh, and in terms of things like temple knights, etc., that may be something that the player characters may need to essentially like. It depending on your campaign, they may have to like buy some supplies to outfit the expedition, or maybe the worshippers are fervent enough in their worship of this deity that they essentially they're gonna pack up and pay for all their own supplies. But I could see at least sort of the cost of the knights coming out of the players' pockets, at least to begin with, until the temple can become self-sustaining. So that could be a gold soak, but I think it's already mechanically meaty enough that you probably don't really want to have players resenting it as far as gold soak goes. But I mean, all sorts of things in games have costs. So as long as it's not prohibitively prohibitively expensive, it should probably be okay.
Hey there. I'm just chiming in with a little supplemental footage from my webcam because I realized during editing that I'd actually missed a couple of important details when I was recording earlier. In order for this to work, it's important that you treat scrolls as though anyone can use them. Basically, anything that's needed to cast that spell is already infused in that scroll right from when it is first made. And then the person who's using the scroll just essentially follows the instructions. They use whatever passphrase or whatever has been bound to it by the original caster in order to unlock the effect. And the 24-hour cast time, I personally would think of it as essentially being like, okay, you cast the spell, over the next 24 hours, the area slowly consecrates, and then at the exact same time the next day from when it was originally cast, it's just like, oh, it's just suddenly it's consecrated. You can use it, and that would get around the whole like, oh well, it's like 80% consecrated, right? We can just start resting now. It's like, no. It takes 24 hours to prepare the area, and then with the way that the stars align or whatever you want for your explanation, it's that exact, like down to the nanosecond, that exact same time the next day that the area is able to be used for a long rest. The other thing is all of this scroll stuff and consecrating, etc., is all well and good for when we're talking about the battle for divine power and resting places and all that sort of thing. But when the group comes across like an arcane or primal place of power, I would allow them to use that to rest as long as someone is proficient in arcana or proficient in nature, respectively. So obviously arcana for arcane places of power and nature for primal places of power. And I would just, I would make them more few and far between. I think that the divine ones should definitely be the most plentiful, given how plentiful shrines already are in the game. But when they do find them, just let them use them as long as people have those skills. Which, if you already have an ongoing campaign, you wish to use this, I would just allow people to trade one of their skills for that. But it should make, in my opinion, it should make some kind of logical sense in that someone who's proficient in Arcana should be able to use something arcane themselves, like a wizard, warlock, sorcerer, like that kind of thing. Eldritch Knight, arcane trickster, and if they can't, then maybe those places of power just simply are not usable by the party. But I think they should still find them. And same with nature. I mean, if you have someone who's like playing like a druid or a shaman, or there are a few other, like a ranger, just some of those more primal based classes, I would, if they don't already have nature tagged as a skill, because there are a lot of people that just don't take nature as a skill, I would let them change to picking nature up, because suddenly it will have actual use. Anyway.
So in terms of game mechanics and Scrolls of Hallow, obviously the players would need to clear the area before they would have the time to cast for the 24-hour cast time to set in. And 24 hours before they could actually benefit from a long rest is plenty of time for some consequences. The rest of the area could essentially bum rush them. Their quest objective could just leave if that was a desirable outcome for the DM. If things that are left aren't that much of a challenge, obviously that's part of where bum rushing comes in. But you could also have them go and get an ally if the DM is realizing that the encounter balance is off in the dungeon, and then come back with that. And you could even combine both of them, where they go and get an ally, and then say they get a caster from the next dungeon over, or the next floor, or they contact someone, whatever. So the players are trying to hold this area for 24 hours, and then a toxic cloud comes in and just starts doing damage to them every round while they leave. And I mean, it's important not to be punitive with this for anyone who's running the game, but that's a good recommendation anyway, is to not be punitive with things like this. Like if this just sounds like a way to torture players for a DM, then that's not really the right attitude to have. In terms of combining Places of Power and Scrolls of Hallow, it can be a bit of a balance between the DM trying to thread that needle in terms of getting the balance right, and that with regards to where they place places of power. But Hallow is a nice, the Scrolls of Hallow are a nice safety net for if you get it wrong, so that DMs don't have to be overly cautious, because the players will have the ability to ensure that they get a long rest for themselves. And in terms of numbers of places of power and numbers of Scrolls of Hallow, that's just something for the DM to tweak as the game goes on. Probably not going to get it perfect, especially not early. And with regards to how exactly you would implement it, that's just some of those levers there that you have behind the scenes in order to kind of curate the game experience. So to wrap things up, I won't go into a whole lot of specific examples. I am quite willing to answer any questions with regards to specific implementation, etc., down in the comments. And if anyone has tried out this mechanic or a similar mechanic or had a similar explanation for things in a game of D&D that they're running, if you would be able to post your experiences, I'd be interested to hear that. This is something that I've started implementing in my own game as a solution to the ongoing issues with long rests and that mechanic. Sort of like worked our way towards this. Finally, I also have started, not only have I started this YouTube channel, but I've also started streaming on Twitch as of a couple of weeks ago at the time of recording this video. I stream Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. What would be most of interest to people watching this would be the Thursday streams as things stand, although I would expect the Thursday streams to I would expect my streaming to become more RPG oriented over time, or maybe even specifically D&D oriented over time, given that is kind of where my interests lie, and with also producing D&D videos at the same time. That would be RPG Thursdays, and I start those at 2 p.m. Pacific time. I usually stream for about 5 hours, so that would be 2 until 7 Pacific time on Thursdays. If you want to pop in on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, which by the time you see this video, I may be doing RPG content on those days anyway, but Wednesdays and Thursdays are an hour later. They start at 3 p.m. Pacific. Obviously, if you're Eastern, just add 3 hours to that start time, so that would be 6 p.m. Eastern. And again, I go for 5 hours. That would be 3 until 8 p.m. Pacific time, Wednesdays and Thursdays. The link to my Twitch will be in the description, and yeah, hope to see you there, especially on Thursdays. I am glad to talk about D&D anytime. Yeah, who knows, may end up with just chatting D&D focused streams in future. I'm going to continue to upload D&D focused videos on this channel. I hope you like this video. It's my first. If you got some use out of this video, please hit like if you liked it. I would love for you to subscribe because there will be more videos coming. If you think this could be of interest or use for your group, if you are willing to share with your group, that would be a great way for this to get out there. And hopefully see you again next time.